I'd like to begin on behalf of the organizers, Lucy, Mark, and myself, to really thank the speakers who I think did a spectacular job of talking about the issue that we were hoping that you would talk about, and that is how do we prepare for the next pandemic? How? And there was a lot of terrific science, but also the concern about how do we take this terrific science and actually turn it into timelines that are actually going to be helpful to us in preparation for the next pandemic. And I think it was clear, and it was discussed a little bit, that a major challenge, but we didn't really discuss it very much here, a major challenge is that there's a lack of a sustainable business model to support what we want to do with the science that is to prepare us for the next pandemic, but there's a lack of a sustainable business model to do that. And that's a non-scientific issue that clearly needs to be addressed as part of pandemic preparedness. And I just want to put it out there because we didn't really talk about it, but it's a major, major issue for us. Other pandemic preparedness issues that were either not discussed or only lightly touched upon today include things such as supply chain issues, which we're all very familiar with, and which, if you think back to the early days of the COVID pandemic, were a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And these supply chain issues, again, are non-scientific issues, but they're issues that we didn't really discuss today that clearly are part of any discussion of pandemic preparedness. And then also, and it's been mentioned several times today, the fact that viruses don't know boundaries, countries, and this really is a global problem. And although we're fortunate in the United States to be wealthy and be in a position where if there is a pandemic, we can react and come up with solutions, that much of the world does not have that luxury. And the pandemic is a global issue. I think a major issue which was highlighted so eloquently was the fact that we still haven't learned from the previous pandemics a lot of things. Most pressing is the lack of testing, and I think it was really wonderful the way Dr. Birx put it, saying that, we are doing diagnosis through symptoms. We're doing diagnosis through symptoms, which is crazy. And we have spent a lot of time today talking about the potential of an avian flu outbreak, and yet we're not testing in the way, anywhere close to the way that one should be testing if we really were concerned about that. And again, that's a largely non-scientific issue, and it's one that we certainly haven't heard good solutions to that. I think this wastewater testing discussion that we just heard is fascinating and very promising, but we also heard that there are some obstacles to implementing that. Clearly there's a need to get it right, and clearly there's a need not to scare the public, but if you have high confidence that you're doing it right, and you have high confidence that you have a signal, then that's incredibly useful, but we need to get the data. And we need to get the data not just from testing, but wastewater. We need to get the data, and then we need to share the data, and we've learned today that actually in the past pandemic, that was not always so easy, but most importantly, what was clearly difficult in the last pandemic was communicating the data, and communicating the data in particular, including the nuances. I think one thing that came up today that was actually disturbing to me has to do with errors, scientific errors. Because science is intrinsically, usually, self-correcting. If a published result or a published interpretation is wrong, and if it's important, then that's going to be followed up by other scientists. And that error is discovered, and that error is corrected, usually by other scientists, although hopefully by the same scientists. But in any case, it's a self-correcting process. And that's one of the wonderful things about science, is that it is self-correcting. If it's not important, okay, nobody cares. But if it is important and an error has been made, science is intrinsically self-correcting. But what was highlighted today, both from a public health point of view as well as from a science point of view, a scientist's point of view, is that there were clear mistakes, scientific mistakes, that were published regarding during the COVID-19 pandemic. And most notably was the notion and the publications indicating that vaccines protect against infection, when in fact that was, for the most part, or maybe for the total part, not measured. And as a scientific community, it bothers me that we're actually not correcting those mistakes in the same way that we correct mistakes that we make in other areas of science. And obviously, this leads to a lack of public trust. If we, as a scientific community, are not correcting our mistakes, then why on earth should the public trust us the next time when we say something scientific? So I think that's something for the scientists in the room, certainly to reflect on, and for us to figure out how to do that much better. And then a final comment that I'll make is that as scientists, we do have a very important role, which has been highlighted today in terms of communication and the importance of communication. And it really is tied to this issue, but we have not effectively communicated what we know and what we don't know, and to make that clear, the difference between the two. But most difficult is communicating about uncertainty. These are not black and white issues. These are issues where we think this, we have a hypothesis, or a current thinking, our current understanding would suggest that, etc. And that is nuanced, but if we don't effectively communicate the science and the nuances, then again, we're not going to earn the public trust that we need to earn. And earning that public trust is clearly such a critical piece of pandemic preparedness. And so I hope that we as a community can discuss and think about how to do that better. And with that, I think I'll close the symposium. Thank you all for your participation, both here as well as online. And again, thank the speakers for a tremendous day.